how's it going? My name is Jay and welcome to the channel. Today we're back here in Sannikovland in Planet Zoo. For those of you who are new here, Sannikovland is my current build in Planet Zoo, where we're focusing on building this really large modern zoo in this lovely lush tropical environment. And as of the past few episodes, we've been exploring the new Australian pack by, building an Australian section in the zoo. If that does sound good to you, please do consider hitting the subscribe button, and of course like the video if you did like today's video. Now with the intro out of the way, let's talk about what we're doing today. Now we're going on to our third animal of the Australian pack, which is going to be the dingo. Now the dingo was probably my least anticipated animal for the pack. I didn't really know an awful lot about the animal. I just thought, dingoes, they're a very iconic Australian animal, but I just didn't know an awful lot about them. I thought, as far as I knew, they were just kind of like feral dogs. But the more I learned about them, the more interesting I found them. They're actually very fascinating animals, and a bit of a taxonomic nightmare if you want to try and classify them, which I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, they were really fun to build a habitat for, and I kind of started developing a bit of a story about this Australian section of the zoo. And it kind of centers around the fact that these habitats are pretty big, and some of them look quite maybe not specifically built for these Australian animals. And I thought, okay, let's get into that a little bit more. And so I kind of got this idea that, okay, what if the Australian section here in Sannikovland wasn't originally intended to be an Australian section? What if it was, at one point when the zoo was still in its early days, it was actually an African section? And as the zoo got bigger, the African section was moved to a much larger part of the zoo, and this then empty section here was restructured to be the Australian section. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea, and it kind of explains why these habitats look the way they do, specifically with today's dingo habitat. So it's a really big habitat today that we're working on for the dingoes. Really very suited to a very large pack of them, and they are a very large pack. We have about 12 dingoes in here that we're going to be introducing, and they have this very large kind of elevated terrain outlook kind of thing with burrows going underneath them. So I imagine this actually would have probably used to be like a lion habitat, or maybe a habitat for hyenas, before they moved that over to the African section, and now this will be for the dingoes. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea, and I was very happy with the idea of like an upcycled habitat or a recycled habitat, because a big theme in this new Australia pack is of course recycled materials and upcycled materials. So I thought, how about we play into that a little bit more just for the habitat itself. Now, as you will have seen on screen, what we've been doing is just modifying the terrain a little bit, just giving some height. You can see that little elevated hill over there where the dingoes will have kind of a vantage point. I find that giving animals like a higher vantage point does make them more comfortable. In real life, that seems to be what a lot of zoos do. If you want to make an apex predator especially very comfortable in its habitat, you give them a high vantage point so that they have the high ground, so to speak, so that they can essentially feel a bit more secure in the environment. They can feel like they're not at any danger, because they're always the ones that have the ability to kind of scout their surroundings and the environment without necessarily feeling trapped at all. Now here what I've just done is quickly dug out some burrows. Now in the wild, dingoes do occasionally use burrows that have been made by other animals as little dens where they can raise their young. Dingo pups live in these little burrow dens up till they're about 8 weeks old, and then they can leave the den. So I thought it'd be cool to introduce these here, and they're going to be very rocky. The holes themselves are a bit large for the dingo, but again, this plays into the idea that maybe this habitat was originally for a much larger animal, but then was repurposed for the dingoes, and I think it works out pretty well, and I really like how the habitat did turn out. Besides the burrow though, the rest of the habitat is relatively simple. It is going to be big and open, lots of space for the dingoes to run around, and I'm going to be reintroducing some elements from some previous habitats as well to make this one look a bit more interesting. Now while we're just building the habitat and adding some foliage, let's get into the species profile for the dingo. So for those of you who are new to the channel, and we do have a lot of new subscribers, so I'll kind of reintroduce the idea of the species profiles. What it is that every time we introduce a new animal into Sannikovland, we do a little bit of a coverage on what the animal is like, their ecology, their behavior, just to learn a little bit more about them and get to know our animals a bit more. So I'll get the species profile for the dingo up on screen now. So here it is, that's an adorable picture of a dingo. Now, the dingo's scientific name is somewhat under dispute. It could be Canis familiaris, which is just the scientific name for all dogs, domestic dogs. It could be Canis familiaris lupus, which means like it's a domesticated subspecies of a wolf kind of, or Canis familiaris dingo, which is the one I've chosen here, which is again kind of a subspecies of the domestic dog. But like I mentioned earlier, dingoes are a little bit of a taxonomic nightmare. They're very hard to classify, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But first, let's get into their stats. So they are listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, but not necessarily in the same way other animals are vulnerable. These guys are more vulnerable in the sense that their pure genetic strains are kind of at risk because they're hybridizing with dogs, domestic dogs, which is a quite interesting thing. We'll again talk about that in a second. Their size, they can get up to about 16 kilograms and about 1.25 meters, so about the standard for a larger dog. Their habitats are incredibly varied. They can go from arid regions to alpine regions to urban areas to tropical, so incredibly varied across the whole of Australia. Their lifespan again is also quite varied. In the wild it's about 3 to 5 years, maybe up to 10. In captivity we have seen some go up to 15 years, some even pushing up towards 20, which is quite cool. Their diet is almost entirely vertebrate prey, which is small mammals, the largest being like kangaroos and smaller cattle, birds, reptiles, insects, even some plant matter like seeds. Let's get into some interesting facts about the dingoes, because these guys are so much more interesting than I gave them credit for. Because I really did think when we first got this announcement that dingoes were pretty, standard generic animals. But learning more about them, they're so much more interesting. And I think that's a little bit of a lesson here, that there aren't really any generic animals. Every single species has like interesting elements to them, or a cool origin, or some unique aspect. And I think that just covers every animal basically. So let's talk about this one. So dingoes are likely descended from domesticated dogs from kind of the Southeast Asian peninsula area, so maybe even Malaysia, and kind of the whole Sunda region essentially. They used to be Asian dingoes, and they might have been brought over by settlers like way back then. I think the oldest dingo bones in Australia were found to be about 3,000 years ago. So, they could have come across that way. They may have crossed land bridges that would have formed at some point. So it is still under debate how they got to Australia, because they're not a native species to Australia. But they're not really invasive anymore because they have become so established, so they wouldn't really be considered invasive. But yeah, it is very interesting when it comes to their origins. They were definitely domesticated by the Aboriginal peoples as well, and European settlers, when they first arrived in Australia, they did notice that people did have domesticated dingoes kind of already established there. Like I mentioned earlier, these guys are kind of vulnerable in a sense that their genetic, essentially the pure dingo genes are kind of declining because more and more dingoes are hybridizing with domestic dogs. Because they are so closely related, they can interbreed very easily, and therefore there are lots and lots of hybrids all across the country. In fact, nearly a third, which I just mentioned. It's kind of crazy that many dingoes might have been hybridized already. There are efforts to conserve that pure dingo kind of genetic strain, but again, because they're so widespread and because they do cross over with urban areas so readily, it is very hard to kind of stop them from breeding with domestic dogs. They are also the largest terrestrial predator in Australia, so they are an apex predator, which means they are absolutely critical for this ecosystem. They would have been outweighed and they would have been the second largest not too long ago when the thylacine was still around. So for those of you who don't know, the thylacine was another large Australian mammal, large Australian mammalian predator, and it went extinct not too long ago, unfortunately. It was called the Tasmanian tiger. It was a very, very beautiful animal. Do look it up. There are some black and white photos of them. They're very interesting species as well. But dingoes are now definitely the largest terrestrial predator. And one final fact is that to protect livestock from dingoes, the government of Australia once actually had this project to erect like a 5,000 kilometer long dingo fence that was just to protect all the livestock, and it's managed by the people who own the land through which the dingo fence crosses through. It was built between the 1920s and 1940s, but some conservationists are suggesting maybe taking down sections of the fence to allow dingoes into these livestock areas to manage more invasive species. Currently there are, Australia does have a problem with invasive species, lots of cats, feral rodents, frogs, they definitely have a frog problem. Even camels. Well, camels aren't really invasive, but Australia does have a camel problem, which is really strange. Definitely look that up. Like, they have to cull camels sometimes because there's too many camels in Australia, which is, again, so strange. But yeah. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed that little species profile. I'm by no means an expert in the dingoes. My specialty tends to lie with birds, reptiles, especially reptiles, amphibians, that sort of thing. And mammals I'm less familiar with, but I'm still very, very interested in. And this sort of thing, learning more about an animal that I might have otherwise missed out on, is one of the real specialties of this game, where I'm just thinking to myself, oh, there's no way I'd find a dingo interesting, and then I come out of it being like, holy cow, dingoes are cool, like, they're really cool. So yeah. Anyways, just here on screen you will have seen that we've been just doing some rock work and some foliage work, just to kind of make the area look a bit more interesting and build up this elevated hill a little bit more for the dingo vantage point. And on top I've just added a little kind of a ramshackle looking shelter with the rusted metal corrugated roof pieces that we got with the Australia pack. I struggled to think whether, at first I didn't know whether I wanted to add those rusted pieces because, again, they're rusted and this is a very modern zoo. I didn't know whether they'd really fit, but I think they look pretty good just over there. Again, it gives that idea that this isn't an upcycled or recycled habitat, where the whole concept is the shelter itself still works fine, but it just looks a little bit older and probably needs a bit of maintenance, so I'm happy to leave it up there. Here on the wall I'm just using some of these lovely Aboriginal inspired art pieces to kind of just give the wall a little bit more flair and again theme it towards the dingoes, because each section so far has been slightly themed towards the animal that we've been introducing. The koala one not so much, but I will have to add some koala deco later on. And as you can see, we're using some of that similar carbon fiber canopy we've been using for the whole Australia section, and just adding in some panels here at the bottom so the dingoes can't climb over. Same goes for some of the other sections later on. Again, the panels aren't meant to be like functional, they're just for looks, just so that it looks like the dingoes can't actually climb over into the guest area. And you may have noticed I also used some fences around the side, and that's just because first off, I was just a little bit lazy to do an actual custom barrier, but then I realized we do actually have this corrugated steel fence, and I actually really love that fence, so I was kind of preferred that over a custom fence, so I did that. And here I'm doing a bit more foliage work. Because this habitat is so open, I did struggle to think of how to make the foliage look a bit more realistic. I ended up going with a bit more of an arid vibe, so a lot of these, I think they're hawthorn. They might be hawthorn plants, can't remember. Some of these new little scraggly, can't remember what they're called, trichonia grass? Maybe, I might have just made that up. Some common reeds, of course. Just plants that look a bit more arid, less of these deep green plants, more of the kind of yellowy green, which gives it a nice dry vibe, and kind of gives you, again, that outback feel. Now here's something, again, to go with a theme today of recycled habitats and stuff like that. What I've done is I've gone back to our cheetah habitat from the African section from way back in maybe 10 episodes ago, I can't remember. No, it can't be 10, was it 10 episodes ago? Maybe 6 episodes ago, something like that. And we made a zip line for the cheetahs so that you could hang a big chunk of meat or a carcass on it and swing it through and have the cheetahs chase after it, and I thought that'd be great enrichment for the dingoes. Of course it doesn't work in game, but it's still a great little thing to add, and I think it looks great here. It would be very, very cool for a dingo to be able to use that. Of course, just in my head, it's not like it actually works, but it looks cool in the habitat, having a zip line for the dingoes. You will also see me adding some of these century plants. They also look great for adding to the arid vibe. And that's pretty much it. We'll add a few more bits of enrichment here and there, just decorating the front here. All the areas with the mulch that you will have seen, just a little bit of planters, those are going to have more of the tropical plants, of course. I imagine with areas with mods like that, they're more for the kind of the guest side of things or for the staff side of things, just so they look a little bit nicer. I do apologize if you can hear a little bit of thunder in the background. I am recording this in the middle of a storm, which is probably not the best idea, but I didn't really want to wait any longer, so apologies for that. Here you're going to see me just do a little bit more rock work on the sides. I'm not really going to finish the fence here on the left. I'm just going to putting that in as a placeholder because that's going to be where the next habitat goes, and I want to really do a little bit more custom fence work there, so I'll do that probably in the next episode, which will, fingers crossed, go out on Saturday. Saturday is when I do my big move over to the UK, so I'm moving halfway across the world. In fact, I even just had my COVID test today, which was an experience. It was a little bit painful, but you know what? As long as I got tested, I'm all good. So I'm going to be flying over to the UK on, well, Friday night, Saturday morning. It's going to be a very long flight. And I'm going to try and pre-record a video to go out at the usual time it does on Saturday. But, you know, it is going to be a big move. I'll be pretty busy. So if there isn't an episode, maybe I'll be out the day after. But again, I'll try my best. And after that, there's going to be another video next week where I cover, we've essentially been doing a challenge on our Discord server. It was titled The Grand Entrant, where you were tasked with creating an entrance for a park with a specific theme. And we've got a few good submissions, and we'll be essentially covering all the submissions in a video sometime next week, and that'll be a lot of fun, I think, as well. And yeah, if you want to take part in future challenges, do hit up our Discord server. Free for anyone to join, and it's a lot of fun. Now we're coming up to the end of today's episode. You're just going to see me put down a few logs, a few broken tree pieces, just to kind of get that little bit of extra interest, I guess. And the final thing we're going to be doing today is just putting in these little canopy pieces using new Australian metal beam pieces, which are great, by the way. I really like these metal beams. They're very, very generic, but at the same time, I like that because it gives them so much like usability. So just making a very simple canopy with the standard fabric pieces. Anyways, that basically is for today. I want to say thank you guys so much for watching, and I want to say a huge thank you for getting us to 800 subscribers. That is spectacular. Still blows my mind. 800 of you actually find this stuff interesting, which is really cool. So thank you so much for 800 subscribers. Like, means the world to me knowing that, you know, you guys enjoy the videos. Thanks so much for commenting on all the videos. Do feel free to comment on this one if you got any thoughts you want to share. Like the video if you did like today's video. Subscribe, of course, if you want more Planet Zoo content. And as always, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!